service was commissioned by Norfolk and Waveney CCG in April last year, so April 2020. So we've had the first year, and we were commissioned for a year. So we've had the first year of our service completely running through the pandemic, as I know everyone else has had to cope with too. Then we were fortunate enough at the beginning of this year, January, to hear that our contract has actually been extended for 3 years, which feels phenomenal. To have 3 years of funding in the voluntary sector is quite amazing. So our project covers the whole of Norfolk and Waveney, and if you haven't heard of Family Action before, we are a national charity providing family support really cradle to grave. So I think that's the ethos of the organisation is again much like SENsational Families. We try to be helpful. We look to see how we can be useful, whether that's with new parents, families where there are no children, right up to older people who might want to access one of our allotment projects. So it's a very varied organisation in terms of family support, and our Norfolk and Waveney ASD and ADHD support service sits within that organisation here in Norfolk. So we have office spaces in Swaffham and Gorston. My particular part of the area is the central area, and that's really everywhere that isn't Swaffham or Gorston. So it's quite a large area. There's myself and 2 family support workers working in that area. But I think it's really important that you know that we do work as a whole team across the county. So there are 10 of us all together, all working part-time. But Norfolk's a very large county, but there are a few of us to get around that county. So what are we funded to do? So in the main, our funding is to support families whilst they're awaiting assessment for their child for autism or for ADHD. And a secondary part of our funding is to run the Puffins ASD programme for parents and carers once they've received a diagnosis of autism for their child. And we run that programme alongside a speech language therapist, an occupational therapist, and someone from the educational psychology team. So that programme runs over 5 sessions, and it's by invitation. But to get an invitation, all you need to do is contact us. Let us know that your child has a diagnosis of autism, and we'll find a place for you. That particular piece of funding does only run until September. So we're waiting to see whether that element of the service will continue. So I'm not really going to tell you too much more about that service, that part of the service. Of course, if you have questions about it, I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. So who can refer? Predominantly our referrals come from Norfolk Community Health and Care or from the Newbury Clinic over in Great Yarmouth. And to date, we've had about 1,400 referrals from NCH&C and about moving towards 600 from the Newbury Clinic. So that's been over the last year. So all of those families will have received a phone call from us in the first place. If we're unable to contact them by telephone, we send a letter describing our offer. If we are able to speak to them on the telephone, that's brilliant. We can start to build a bit more of a relationship with them. Unsurprisingly, the more that people know we're here, we are beginning to get referrals from other sources. So we really love to receive self-referrals. If parents find out about us from whatever source, and phone or email, we're really happy to try to offer some support. Even if, often that might be a parent whose child isn't yet on the assessment pathway, but they're just wanting a bit of guidance about how they might do that, or what sort of adaptations they might be able to ask their child's school to make, that sort of thing. So we're always, again, going back to that sort of underlying principle of trying to be helpful. We're very clear about what we're commissioned to do, but we also understand that that doesn't really mean anything to a parent who's looking for support. So we would always try to support. We increasingly get referrals from schools, so via SENCos, early help and social care. Community paediatricians are starting to refer families to us where maybe the child doesn't quite meet the criteria to be put onto the assessment pathway, but there are some, maybe some behavioural issues that parents would welcome and value some support with. And then, most other agencies, that catch-all really of anyone who'd like to phone us up and have a chat with us, we will see if we're able to help. So again, like SENsational Families, we do some signposting, but again, in common with you, that isn't just, here's a list of people that might be useful. We actually, try to build that dialogue with another service and really support families that need that level of support. For other parents, you're really happy just to have that information and go out and find it for yourself. So we have a monthly newsletter that always has information about what we're doing, but also about anything else that we know about that's going on in the county. Our monthly support sessions and workshops have been online, but we are planning now for those to move back to face-to-face. We just started a session in Swaffham. I'm looking at putting on some sessions in the central area of the county, and I'd really value your input into whereabouts you think that would be useful. Family Action runs a telephone helpline called Family Line that's available at the weekend and up until 9 o'clock in the evening. So we always give families that contact, because often, including our own service, we tend to perhaps only be available during office hours, maybe extending that day to the evening. But Family Line is something that we let families know about, so they know they can make contact outside of usual office hours. And then our main, I suppose, group offer in terms of course, is Norfolk Positive Behaviour Strategies. And I just want to say a little bit about this. So if you haven't heard of the course and you'd like to access it, it is available online. So we put it online during the pandemic. Again, we are moving to deliver this face-to-face, but of course the online offer will still be there. So it's on the NHS Just One Norfolk website. There are some other courses called Positive Behaviour Support that are available in different parts of the country that we know have very mixed reception in terms of how appropriate they are to be using with children and young people. I just want to be really clear that this course was developed by Dr. Mel Bruce, a clinical psychologist who runs the Starfish service in Norfolk. And it's very much based on, as it says, positive behaviour. So it's very much about looking at your child's behaviour as a means of communication and then understanding what it is your child's trying to communicate. So very much using routine and structure, praise and reward. The bucket model, so this idea that probably many of you are familiar with, that our heads are our buckets that are getting full of all the stresses that might be going on in our daily life, and it might just take one final drip into the bucket and your bucket overflows and you're having a meltdown. And that's why often our children will be picked out as being deliberately naughty or deliberately misbehaving because one day they've coped with a certain action, maybe a bell ringing or chalk scraping on someone's desk, and another day they completely can't cope with that. It's just overload for them because their bucket's been filling with all sorts of other issues during the day. So it goes into that in quite a bit of detail. There's some, I suppose, templates for looking at your own positive behaviour support plan, and very much around understanding those sensory needs. This is just a little quote that, again, you may be familiar with, that, this whole idea that we, if we see a child's behaviour as inappropriate, as a society, perhaps previously, we've tended to punish that rather than try to understand what that behaviour is trying to tell us. And so really wanting to get away from that idea and really support the child and us as parents to understand and I suppose to be able to empathise. And I think if we're able to show empathy, we're much more likely to respond with a helpful and supportive approach. So in addition to our group offer, we do offer some one-to-one support. Again, this has been very much telephone or Zoom. And our contract is really that home visiting would be the exception rather than the rule, because the county is so large, and we want to be able to really offer that support to as many people as possible. But for example, at the moment I am doing some home support with a mum who has a quite severe hearing loss in both ears, so wouldn't be able to access any other method of support. So we started in the garden, and we've both agreed now that we're double vaccinated, so we've started to meet inside, and that feels really appropriate in terms of use of time. She's an absolutely wonderful mother who wouldn't be able to access our support in any other way. So we always work with consent. That's absolutely at the top of everyone's list. And we do quite a lot of work with schools. I mean, I would say that predominantly that's supporting parents to know what they're entitled to, understanding that schools are having, it's been a really tough time for schools, and absolutely, in the majority, schools are trying to do their absolute best. But sometimes just some little tweaks in terms of adjustments, reasonable adjustments that may be able to be made for children to help that school environment just to feel much, much safer. We definitely look a lot at using visuals and visual timetables and social stories, so we can give a lot of support. And around all of those issues, we, as well as providing some one-to-one support, we run a range of workshops around each of those areas to really offer as broad a range of support as possible.